Hi everyone, my name is Nadia, and today I'll be talking to you guys about cross-cultural differences in age stereotypes and cognition. So the main question this presentation will address is, do cross-cultural differences in age stereotypes lead to cross-cultural differences in cognitive functioning in older adults? So before we start comparing cultures, let's talk a little bit about how pervasive age stereotypes are across all cultures and across the world. So, the World Health Organization's Global Report on Ageism found that worldwide, at least one out of every two people is ageist towards older adults, and that across 57 countries, 60% of people believe that older adults are not well respected. So, clearly, age stereotyping is not something that is restricted to one culture or confined by national borders. It's a global issue, and according to the World Health Organization, it affects billions of people each year worldwide. Now, although age stereotyping is clearly prevalent all across the world, that doesn't mean that it's exactly the same across the world. And in fact, studies have shown that there are cultural differences in age stereotyping. So some cultures hold more negative stereotypes than others. And as we discussed in our age stereotype lecture, negative age stereotypes can be harmful because they can be internalized in older adulthood and can negatively impact cognitive functioning. So, all of this ultimately led to my thesis, which states that cross cultural differences in age stereotypes can lead to differences in the cognitive functioning of older adults. Specifically, older adults from cultures with more positive views towards aging exhibit better cognitive functioning compared to older adults from cultures with more negative views towards aging. All right, time to support that thesis with evidence. The first study we will look at was conducted by Levi and Langer, and it's called Aging Free from Negative Stereotypes: Successful Memory in China and Among the American Deaf. So, the purpose of this study was to determine whether there are differences in age stereotypes between mainstream American, American Deaf, and Chinese cultures, and whether this leads to differences in episodic memory amongst older adults. Now, before I proceed, I'll just say that these three were determined to be three valid different cultures due to their differences in values, language, and traditions, amongst other things. So, the participants included 30 people each from mainstream American, American Deaf, and Chinese cultures. Of those 30 people from each group, half were young adults and half were older adults. So, for the procedure, the first part of the study assessed age views using an aging questionnaire, as well as by asking participants to list the first five words that come to mind when thinking of somebody old. Next, participants underwent four tests of episodic memory: immediate recall, delayed recall, learned recall, and probed recall. And here are the results. The first part of the study, which assessed age views, revealed that American Deaf and Chinese participants had significantly more positive views towards aging than mainstream American participants. They described old people as more positive and more active than mainstream Americans, and they were more likely to list internal qualities of old people rather than external qualities. Specifically, Chinese participants had the most positive views, followed by American Deaf and then American Hearing. However, the key part of the study was that in the second phase, which assessed episodic memory performance, they found that amongst older adults, memory performance matched this pattern. So Chinese participants had the best combined memory performance, followed by American Deaf, and then finally American Hearing. When a path analysis was conducted, the researchers found that memory performance amongst older adults was indeed mediated by views on aging. All right, the second study was conducted by Chung and Lin, and it's called A Cross-Cultural Examination of Positivity Effect in Memory. So before we get into the study, you may be thinking, what is the positivity effect? It is older adults' tendency to attend to, remember, or cognitively process more positive stimuli than negative. It's seen as a cognitive emotional benefit for older adults, and it's also an indicator of good cognitive control. So, the purpose of this study was to determine whether there are differences in age stereotypes between the US and China, and whether this leads to differences in the positivity effect in older adults. The participants were 43 young adults and 36 older adults from the US, and 31 young adults and 39 old adults from Canton, China. For the procedure, the first part of the study assessed the positivity effect using a picture memory task. So essentially, participants were shown a series of 30 pictures, and they then had to recall them as much as they could and in any order after 5 minutes. Greater recall for more positive pictures than negative pictures is an indicator of the positivity effect. The second part of the study assessed views on aging. Participants were asked to write down 5 words that they associate with aging. And here are the results. So, for views on aging, researchers found that Chinese participants, both young and old, held significantly more positive views towards aging than their US counterparts. For the picture memory task, researchers found that the positivity effect was present in both the US and China. That is, in both cultures, older adults recalled significantly more positive pictures and significantly fewer negative pictures than younger adults. However, the key finding was that Chinese older adults recalled significantly fewer negative pictures than US older adults. So, in other words, although both cultures showed a positivity effect, the Chinese culture, with the more positive views on aging, showed a more prominent positivity effect. All right, and here is the final study. It was conducted by Nicholas and colleagues, and it's called Cultural Differences in Susceptibility to Stereotype Threat, France versus India. So, first off, here's a quick reminder of what stereotype threat is. We did touch on it in class, but in case you've forgotten it, it is the tendency for older adults to perform worse on cognitive tasks when negative age stereotypes are made salient to them. So, the purpose of this study was to determine whether there are differences in age stereotypes between France and India, and whether this leads to differences in the susceptibility to stereotype threat. The participants were 52 older adults from France and 52 older adults from India. The procedure was the first part of the study assessed age views using the implicit association task, which measures implicit attitudes. The second part of the study assessed susceptibility to stereotype threat. So essentially, there were two conditions, a stereotype threat condition and a no threat condition. And each group's performance on an arithmetic task was then measured. And here are the results. So, the age view assessment revealed that Indian participants held significantly more positive attitudes towards old people than their French counterparts. They were significantly less likely to show automatic preferences for young people over old people. In terms of susceptibility to stereotype threat, the researchers found that stereotype threat significantly worsened French participants' performance on all types of arithmetic problems, whereas it only affected Indian participants' performance on hard problems. They also found that stereotype threat impacted French participants' selection and execution of solving strategies for the arithmetic problems, whereas it only affected Indian participants' selection of strategies. So, overall, the French, with the more negative views on aging, were more susceptible to stereotype threat. All right, and here is a quick summary of the 3 studies we just went through. So, the first study found that Chinese cultures has the most positive views towards aging, followed by deaf America and then mainstream America, and that episodic memory performance followed this pattern. So, Chinese participants had the best episodic memory, followed by American deaf participants, and then participants from mainstream America. The second study found that China has more positive views towards aging than the US, and that Chinese participants showed a more prominent positivity effect than US participants. And finally, the third study demonstrated that India has more positive views towards aging than France, and that Indian participants were less susceptible to stereotype threat. So, all of this ultimately supports our thesis because older adults from cultures with more positive views on aging demonstrated better episodic memory, enhanced positivity effect, and less susceptibility to stereotype threat than older adults from cultures with more negative views. And what this means is that cultural context is a powerful factor in cognition and aging, and the implications for older adults are very important. If we can alter cultural perceptions towards aging to be more positive, perhaps through public education or public interventions, it could have very positive outcomes on cognitive aging. So that's everything, and thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed.